Hi. Well, we often hear that dyslexics are visual people. So let's just have a quick look at what that means. First of all, it might be interesting to quickly examine what it doesn't mean. What it doesn't mean is VACOG or EVAC or VAK, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, gustatory, emotional, the senses of learning, the learning styles. That dyslexic people have got a strong visual learning style. Why doesn't it mean that? Well, one of the reasons is that there is little to no neurological evidence of these different learning styles. People talk about them with no real scientific proof, so it's really unclear whether they exist. There's little to no empirical evidence of these learning styles working, and in fact, a lot of the time when people have done studies about these learning styles, it's been shown that, in fact, people who claim to have a visual learning style learn just as easily with an auditory learning style, or people who claim to have a kinesthetic learning style learn just as easily visually. So there's no empirical evidence about it either. It also misunderstands neurological research. So neurological research doesn't say that different parts of the brain are somehow separate. The brain works as a holistic entity. It works as a whole. And it would be incorrect of us to conclude that, the visual parts fire more in a visual learning style, or auditory learners have auditory learning parts firing better. The brain is interconnected. And finally, it really misunderstands what we mean when we talk about senses. How many senses do you have? Most people say 5. Seeing, hearing, smelling, touching, and tasting. These are the 5 senses. Hearing, seeing, smelling, tasting, and touching. Your 5 senses that everybody says we have. But what about proprioception? Your sense of where your body is in space. What about your vestibular sense? Your sense of balance? What about your sense of distance, your sense of proximity? What about your sense of warmth? What about your sense of height? What about your sense of pain? What about, as many people talk about, your moral sense? All sorts of other senses. What about your sense of time? These are senses just as much as anything else. And so this visual, auditory, kinesthetic learning style seems to misunderstand the nature of our senses. However, scientists using MRI scans have discovered that dyslexics have greater connectivity to the visual cortex of the brain, and also to the parahippocampal region, which influences visual memory. In other words, the dyslexic brain is wired for sight. Interestingly, a study by the Canadian Dyslexia Centre, and I'm not quite sure what this research was or where it came from, but interestingly this study showed that whilst neurotypical non-dyslexic people tend to process about 150 images per second in their brains, dyslexics process somewhere between 1,500 and 4,000 visual images per second in their brains. Another test in 2015 showed dyslexic students exhibited greater visualization strategies compared with non-dyslexic subjects. And this included analytical visualization, creative visualization. And so it seems that some of the tests are showing that dyslexic people have greater visualization capacity and the greater capacity to essentially to conceptualize using visualization skills. This is hardly surprising. In 2018, an organization called the Dyslexic Advantage surveyed 1,100 participants, and they discovered by asking a simple question, something fascinating. The question was, to what extent do you agree with this statement? When I view 3D spatial images in my mind, I can manipulate them and see them from multiple angles. Well, what was really interesting about this is that of the dyslexic sample, round about 5% of them strongly disagreed, round about 10% of them disagreed, a little over 13% of them somewhat agreed, about 30% of them agreed, and over 42% of them strongly agreed. But with the non-dyslexic samples, 23% of them strongly disagreed, 35% of them disagreed, 21% somewhat agreed, 12% agreed, and about 6% strongly agreed. In other words, the dyslexic sample and the non-dyslexic sample were opposites of each other. The dyslexics could manipulate 3D spatial images in their mind far better than non-dyslexics. This is 1,100 people they surveyed. Other researchers compared two groups of 11-year-old children to see how well they remembered line drawings after 10 minutes and after 24 hours. And the dyslexic children, we think unsurprisingly, the dyslexic children remembered them far better than the non-dyslexic children. Research has shown that dyslexics seem to have greater peripheral vision than non-dyslexics. And interestingly enough, dyslexic subjects appear to be able to see blurred images more clearly than non-dyslexic subjects can. Professor John Stein of Oxford University Medical School found that dyslexics seem to be far more proficient at visual processing, and indeed holistic kinds of visual processing. James Russell, the inventor of the compact disc and dyslexic, said that he designed his compact discs in his brain by visualizing without even picking up a tool. Mark Rowe, a top surgeon, said that he would do all his surgery in his mind's eye before he picked up a scalpel and set the scalpel to a human being. Words or the language, as they are written or spoken, do not seem to play any role in my mechanism of thought. The entities which serve as elements in thought are more or less clear images which can be voluntarily reproduced and combined. This is this combinatory play that seems to be so essential a feature in productive thought. And this was, in fact, Albert Einstein, very famous dyslexic, who came out with his theory of relativity by visualizing himself sitting on a beam of light. So, while short-term working memory appears to suffer, there seems to be a marked increase in the ability to conceptualize, visualize, and manipulate objects and ideas in the dyslexic brain. Research has identified higher analytical and mental visualization techniques among students with dyslexia than non-dyslexic students, and dyslexia appears to be associated with higher holistic visualization skills. If you like this video, hit the like button. Please like, please comment, please share. You'd be doing me an awful favour. Thank you very much indeed.